Hello, welcome to Older Adults in Recovery. We're not who we used to be. My name is Kathy Betts, and I'm going to just take a few minutes while people join us to tell you about the many partners who made this webinar possible. Starting with Massachusetts AARP. I am actually on the AARP Advisory Board and want to tell you a little bit about AARP in case you don't know. AARP serves and fights for those age 50 and older. Their major focus is on financial security, health access, social emotional well-being, and livable communities so that folks can stay in their communities and age. Maintaining Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, controlling prescription prices are their major focus. If you want to learn more about AARP, you can go to aarp.org/MA. And now I want to thank some of our other contributors. Deborah Flynn Gonzalez is the Recovery Support Coordinator for the Bureau of Substance Abuse Services at DPH. Deborah gathered this great panel who we're going to hear from, and literally we couldn't do it without the panel. And Deborah works every day to support recovery. Special thanks to Julie Bunch, who's the New England coordinator of the Mass Organization for Addiction and Recovery, which we know as MOAR. Their mission is to organize recovering individuals, families, and friends, and to educate the public about recovery from alcohol and other addictions. You'll be hearing from Julie shortly. Haley Wood is the Economic and Security Outreach Manager at the Mass Councils of Aging. She helped us plan this webinar and spread the word about it. Thanks to Matt Brogan, who organized us all, and Cassie Kramer from the Adult Network at Mass Association for Mental Health. Cassie will now take a minute to talk about MAMH and to review the meeting logistics. Cassie?
Hi. Thank you so much for being with us. My name is Cassie Kramer. I'm the project manager of the Older Adult Behavioral Health Network at the Massachusetts Association for Mental Health. We provide public education, training, and advocacy to help older adults with behavioral health conditions age at home in the community. As Kathy mentioned, this webinar is a joint effort between the Older Adult Behavioral Health Network at MAMH, AARP Massachusetts, the Department of Public Health, and the Mass Organization for Addictions Recovery, and the Mass Councils on Aging. You can learn more about the work of the sponsoring agencies and how to get involved by accessing the links in the chat. I'm going to jump right into some housekeeping items and facts, which my colleague Maddie will also be dropping in the chat for you. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the MAMH YouTube page early next week. Because this is a webinar, you'll see you have access to both the chat feature and the Q&A feature. We ask that you hold questions until the end of the webinar, as we've built in times for our panelists to join together to answer them. We ask that you use the Q&A feature to ask questions, as it's easier for us to manage. Again, time for questions will be at the conclusion of the panel, and please use the Q&A feature in your lower toolbar within the Zoom window. If you're having any technical difficulties throughout the webinar, please look for MAMH Tech and feel free to send a message in the chat. My colleague Maddie Brogan is manning the MAMH Tech account, and we'll be standing by once we get into the panel discussion. I'll now turn it over to Deborah Flynn Gonzalez and our panelists for an inspiring discussion.
Thank you so much to everyone who got this panel together and this webinar. We're very excited about it. We've done this webinar in a number of places, and it's really exciting to me to bring it to spaces that are not traditionally recovery-oriented, because we've done them a lot in recovery-oriented spaces like conferences that are really focused on that. And we've always said we really need to get the word out to just older adults in senior centers and in other, places where there aren't necessarily people that are in recovery. So we're very excited about that. And I'm so excited to share the spotlight and the space with my colleague Julie Bunch from MOAR, and with the great panelists who are from the recovery support centers. And so my name is Debbie Flynn Gonzalez. As you see, I am a woman in recovery, and I'm an older adult in recovery, a mother, a wife, and a grandmother in recovery. So I'm proud to say that because being a grandma is a primary part of my identity, and one that I'm most proud of because my grandchildren have never ever seen their grandma under the influence of any substances. And frankly, are usually quite shocked when we do talk about it as they get older. They're like, "Grandma, you did that?" So it's very interesting. But a pleasure. We get this second chance to parent again with our grandchildren. So today we're going to kind of look at, we have some objectives we're going to cover in various ways throughout this little journey, kind of looking at the changing of the landscape of recovery from when we started to now, the impact of our health on our recovery, which is a pretty big one, dealing with ageism and recovery, stigma together. That's kind of a double whammy, and learning the new pathways to restart our recovery for those of us who've been in recovery for a long time, finding meaning and purpose and giving back, being able to learn from the younger generations in recovery, and just our deepening of relationships with our personal relationships and family, and a higher power that comes with recovery and being an older adult. And then the greatest part, sharing our lived and living experience, because we are still living it. Okay, so just to kind of start out, like we're talking about older adults, who are we? Who are older adults? Well, it's it's a very large population right now because we're talking a lot about baby boomers quite often. I happen to be in that category. And many people, as I was talking about this workshop, were like, well, what's an older adult? Or when we've had groups within the peer recovery support centers, they're like, well, if it's for older adults, well, how old do you have to be? And, there's no magic number, but, we kind of say 65, 60, 50, however you define that. But the growing population, as you can see in this chart, it's really, growing. By 2030, they say 1 in 5 people will be over 65. That's pretty amazing, right? And the 80 and up is growing quickly. So that's an interesting bit of information as well. So let's talk a little bit about this ageism. So it's still like okay, it seems, to tell like old people jokes and those kind of things. And sometimes we were even joking about it ourselves just before here, like about, well, this is half the battle. We got onto this platform. We're battling technology as an older adult, and and it's okay. I guess it's okay when we're making fun of ourselves, right? But maybe not so much when other people are. So there's something to be careful of. But the other kind of stereotypical things we might hear is that, older adults are forgetful, that they're naive, kind of easy to take advantage of, and subject to discrimination with regards to credit and fraud and things like that. And then there is this idea that older people, they don't use drugs or do excessive drinking, that they, but well, they were in recovery, or certainly this is a human condition. It is a disease that there is no discrimination for. The alcoholism, substance use disorder, it affects everyone, from younger adults to older adults. And we know that sort of the backdrop of this is that we view addiction as a chronic and relapsing disease. So we're going to have, just like diabetes, we're going to have times where we're relapsing and in relapse mode and needing other treatments and things like that. So it stands to reason that as older adults, we would also experience that. So the reality of this is right now, like, about 20% of those over 65 are working or looking for work. And, right now, that as the times are kind of scary with regards to Social Security and 401ks and things like that, it's a scary time. So I suspect that more people are going to be working longer and looking for work and doing supplemental work as the economy changes too. So this is a reality that we live with. Many are providing financial or childcare supports to their families or caregivers or volunteers. Right now, I have a couple what we call boomerang children in my house. Those are the adult children we have that leave and come back boomerangs. And so a lot of us older adults are doing that because it is unaffordable for our families to live in many cases, and they're then coming back to stay with us. And then there's, even with serious health conditions, some are continuing to have active lives. So, we was just talking about the woman whom I'm dedicating this to today, our friend Sherry, who was our panelist, who's dealing with a serious illness now and couldn't be here. But we have these things going on, and yet we're still pushing and working. And a lot of times people don't know this, that we're dealing with serious illnesses, because we're still having to work and do what we have to do. Up to 70% of this older population will continue to age at home. So a lot of people are staying at home. About 30% will live in a long-term care facility at some point. And about 20% of that need short-term skilled post-surgery or other rehab care. So we go through periods where that does happen. So what are the changes we experience? These are the things that happen with like what we think are normal older adults that don't have maybe, substance use as part of it. And so then when you add that in, it's even more so. But just normal parts of aging, less flexibility, metabolism changes, vision, digestive issues, bones less dense, weight changes, all of these things that many of us have experienced for sure. And then this is a really big consideration and complicating factor for people in recovery. Most older adults have at least one prescription med. Most have many more, right? 78% have a medication that interacts with alcohol, or potentially other drugs that might be taken for behavioral health, antidepressants, things of that nature. And many of these meds may cause balance problems or falls, things like that. Some for multiple conditions or losses that may lead to depression and isolation. So people are taking, as an older adult, many medications that could complicate their recovery. And often, oftentimes we're dealing with maybe a primary care doctor who is not thinking to ask the questions about recovery to an older adult because they're focused on that older adult and those issues. So, well, you need this, you need this, you need this, and not maybe asking, if they've had if it's not already identified, or if we're not identifying it, they may not be asking those questions. Could this be problematic for you as a person in recovery? It's things to consider. So then there's a small percentage with, and we refer to it as AOD, alcohol and other drugs, use or problematic. It might seem as a small percentage of people, of older adults that have this, but the numbers are very large because of the large amount of older adults there are in this category. So it's a lot of people. Substance use disorders can accelerate all of those other issues I showed you earlier that are common for older adults. A substance use disorder can accelerate those, like frailty, many of those health conditions, and lead to the early onset of geriatric conditions. There's the issue of alcohol and pain and anxiety meds I talked about before. In general, just a total decrease in body water, which means that alcohol can have a stronger effect that lasts longer. So sometimes older adults may say, well, I've always been, drinking a couple glasses of wine after dinner. And, now all of a sudden it's taking more of an effect on them because of the decrease in their body water and other physical conditions. So there are changes that also affect that. And then something else to consider is that a lot of older adults living in assisted living or retirement communities, or even going to social, centers for the aged, many of those activities actually promote drinking. Like, there's the casino trip, or we're going to the wine tasting, or things like that. And without thinking that there may be people in recovery in that space. So those are just important things to consider. So then we have the intersection of both of them, right? Many people in recovery are just now attending to all these health issues. So a lot of times in my circle, when I'm talking to, the great majority of my friends who are also older adults in recovery, and I hear this often. I got into recovery and I'm, doing well. And now all these things are wrong with me, all these health issues. And the reality is they were always there, right? But as in our early, use of substances, we were ignoring them. So now we have this intersection, and we see all of these issues like a weakened immune system, heart problems, and then there's the regular problems that you have. It affects everything. And whereas it seems like we're trying to be healthy, we still have all these things going wrong. And in a healthy aging, you're doing all of those activities in the little diagram there: exercise and social activity and diet, and you're now living a healthier life. And that's still going to help. Sometimes people say, oh, it's too late, I got all these health issues. But no, it's definitely not. These are really important things to continue to do and to implement into your life as an older adult. Now, the big issue is kind of what next. So we go through all of these things and the health issues and the, many just sort of ideas about what an older adult is. But now we're trying to find ourselves as an older adult in recovery. And loneliness and making connections is one of the big pieces, because what I have found is a lot of older adults often are just living their recovery in isolation. They might not be talking about that at the senior center or with their group of older friends, unless they're friends in recovery or they're involved in some sort of recovery community. So this is what we want to say. All of these activities are really important, and it's important to have social connections with people of all ages and to do, volunteer things. And you may do things with your church, and you might go to these councils on the aging, but also to start introducing the possibility of getting connected with a recovery community, and even better, an older adult recovery community. So this is what the panel is going to really focus on, and we'll talk more about, because it really just makes all the difference. And I feel like, at least in my own life, that has been the thing that has helped me to deal with guilt and shame that we all often share as older adults, and like I wish I had done this, and if only it had been that way, and our kind of longing that we had not done the things we did as a younger adult or earlier in our life before we get into recovery. So these are some of the stereotypes. Remember, we talked about like some of the discriminating factors with older adults, and now we look at older adults with substance use or alcohol and other drug stereotypes. We add more to it, and these are some of the things that people believe about older adults in recovery or seeking recovery, like they should get it by now, or they're never going to change, or like it's too late. They got this far. Why not just keep going? And we've heard this phrase: you can't teach an old dog new tricks, or once a whatever drunk, always a drunk, whatever. You can fill in the blank, or just that people have often, and I've heard this: oh, they're that old and they're still doing this, they're a loser. And that people wouldn't say that about younger people often, that, well, they'll get it, or they keep trying and all of that, and we're no different than anyone else as a person in recovery, as a person struggling with a substance use disorder. So we are not the same, but also the good news is recovery is not the same, right? Back in so when we look at the early times, and this is a great book if anyone ever wants to read something interesting, Slaying the Dragon is wonderful, about the history of addiction treatment and recovery in America. And, it really started out way back when with the Native Americans and the colonial responses to this alcohol and drug problems. And way back in the 19th century, they started recovery mutual aid societies. And then they had what they call, they put people in institutions and asylums that were seen as these problematic people using drugs and alcohol. And then they kind of came up with some other, what they called inebriate homes. Just sort of the idea was, get them out of here, put them away, right? We don't know how to deal with them. And they really just didn't know how to deal with folks at that point. So thankfully, things started to change. And then in the 20th century, they began some sort of treatment, which which really started the uprise of social and self-help groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, which most of us have heard of, and for a long time was kind of the only thing out there. So the birth and evolution of this whole modern addiction treatment started to happen, and there really started to have a lot of changes. 12-step fellowships really started to, make sense to a lot of folks. And the idea was that perhaps there is help out there, and maybe this is not a moral failing. Finally, we finally started to see that. And the biggest thing was you're not alone. So if you've ever walked into a meeting in your first meeting and that's the biggest step you ever take, just to walk through those doors, you often just sit back and hear the stories and say, oh, wow, I felt like that. I'm not alone. And that's a really good feeling to have. Then it kind of took a little bit of a turn with our good friend Nancy, who, in that whole campaign that said, listen, just say no. And, it's that easy. If only it were that easy, right? And there was a whole cultural backlash of that. And they started to do lots of services then. And the states and, and the government got involved with that. And then, it kind of started to take a turn to say, listen, we're going to treat this like, an illness. And that was a good thing in many ways. But there was still this sort of idea that you can stop if you want to, just say no. And then what happened was something interesting happened at that time. It was the AIDS epidemic, and people started uprising and talking about what was going on. And people in recovery then felt empowered to do that. And this movie called The Anonymous People came out, and another great reference, it's available on all kind of streaming services. The Anonymous People kind of said, listen, we don't have to be anonymous. And some famous people started to come out about their recovery status. And then things started to change, just as it did within the AIDS epidemic and that whole movement. So now we're looking at the 21st century, and it's just an explosion of everything happening. It's fantastic, right? Internet-based recovery support service. We have recovery support in community centers, residence schools, recovery high schools, ministries, recovery cafes. And we have this really birth of a movement. And there's MOAR, which my good friend Julie works with MOAR, and they just have done so much fantastic work here in Massachusetts to really spread the word and advocate for change on all areas, legislatively and personally, and for all of us, just to say that there are so many options. There's, so it isn't just how it was in the day when it was like AA, maybe then Narcotics Anonymous, NA, and just try to grin and bear it and get through it. There's so much more, and the research has really shown this as well, and how effective it is, particularly in the peer world. So kind of summing that up, it's the changes. Then it was like abstinent base only too, just stop completely. That was it. Detox, there was a lot of men's groups, there was a lot of 12-step, and then they had offered clinical services. But now we have these non-clinical. We have peer support groups. We have multiple pathways. This is what we refer to in the peer world as, you determine the path of your recovery. And it could be anything from a formal type group or service, and those are still great. 12-step groups have saved a lot of lives, but maybe somebody wants to just, go out and commune with nature and do something and work on a farm, and that's part of their recovery. That's their pathway. There's all sorts of pathways springing up all over, and the only one that's right is the one that's right for you. And then there's harm reduction too. So we support this, that you may not be ready to stop. You may not even want to stop completely, but how can you be safe? How can you still live your best life? And then MOAR does a lot of work, and those of us in the peer world, on the whole changing of our language and how we refer to ourselves. You'll notice I refer to myself as a person in recovery, a woman in recovery. I'm in recovery today, people will say. And we respect the rules of the rooms that we go into. So when I go to an AA meeting, I say, hi, I'm Debbie, I'm an alcoholic. But in my regular everyday life, I've learned that when I say that in other spaces, they may have an idea that that means I'm still drinking, that I'm still, a person that is using alcohol, or if I say I'm Debbie, I'm an addict, they may think, oh, she's still using drugs, right? So the best example I give of that is if you're going to, say you have a new doctor and you want to tell them about your recovery, you want them to know. If you say to your doctor, if I were to say, hi, I'm Debbie and I'm an addict, they kind of say, oh. But if I say, oh, hi, I'm Debbie and I'm a woman in long-term recovery, they say, congratulations. Nobody ever says congratulations when I introduce myself as an addict or an alcoholic. I can just tell you that they don't say congratulations. So it changes the way people see recovery, and that we see ourselves. We recover out loud, and that's a good thing to do. So with that, I will encourage, and you'll hear stories about, but we encourage you to visit a peer recovery support center. There's 39 of them in the state of Massachusetts. They're all over the map, everywhere from North Adams in the Berkshires to Martha's Vineyard. And if you can scan that code and it'll be in the materials that are sent out as well. There's a link at the end, and you can get information on each of the peer recovery support centers in the state of Massachusetts. We have more than anywhere in the country, which is pretty cool. And we've often said that wouldn't it be great if there was a recovery center in every community center, just like there was a senior center in every community? And they should go hand in hand, right? And there's times when I'm a person in recovery, but I like to go to my senior center where I don't really necessarily talk about my recovery. If it comes up in conversation, it does. I might like to have things in there at times, but then there's times where I like to, go to my recovery group. There's things for everyone at different times. So we would encourage you to access those, because they're just wonderful places. And that's all of them that are there in all of the different regions throughout the state of Massachusetts. And that information will be on that QR code if you click it. Some of the specific resources and other ones that you can access as an older adult or any adult in recovery. There are all of these meeting links here. We'll have information on the meetings that are available, and some of them are specific to older adults. And some of those pathways are not as familiar to people. So the ones at top, like Recovery Dharma, that's like a Buddhist meditational type meeting. And many of them are also virtual, which does work really well for a lot of us that are unable to leave the home, or maybe in short-term rehab, or you want to go to a meeting that's somewhere outside of where you can get to. Dual recovery is for people with a dual diagnosis, mental health and substance use. And the CR, that's Celebrate Recovery, which is a 12-step faith-based substance use disorder. And that's for anybody with actually hurts, habits, and hangups. So pretty much everybody fits into that. And then we have Smart Recovery, which is a computer-based, internet-based program that a lot of folks like to set goals for their recovery and things like that. And then the NA and AA. And at the bottom is our mass substance use helpline. And that's a link for that. And anyone can access that if they do need treatment or any other information. They can access that. There's a telephone number you can call and have a live person answer your questions as well. There's a couple flyers I added here that are regular parts of our schedules in a couple of the recovery centers. So we have over at the Bridge Recovery Center in Malden, there's a senior recovery social that happens every Sunday. The Bridge is a beautiful place, and they, have a little meal and kind of just get together, and it's people in recovery that are older adults. And over in the beautiful town of Gloucester, right on the docks there, they have the Aging and the 12 Steps group, which happens Thursdays at 2:00 at the Core Recovery Center. And that is a group specifically. I love what they say here: aging well, wisely, and joyously, using the guidance of the 12 steps. So they have a great group there. And we hope that many more of those will spring up, but in the recovery centers, we are called peer recovery support centers because it's the peers, it's the members who host these groups, who facilitate them, who really birth them in the space. So if we have more older adults going to a particular center, they may say, hey, I'd like to do a group on, for older adults here on, or I'd like to do a social group for older adults here, or just a support group for older adults in recovery. And then those will spring up. So that might be something that somebody here could actually do in a peer recovery support center when they become accustomed to it, become a member, and start to get involved. And it's a great opportunity. So bringing this senior identity into our recovery identity, what are the benefits? Like, we refer to them often as being the OG, I won't say what that means, but it's kind of the veteran, of the spaces, and being what we look at, like, what are there's positives and negatives for both of it. So being an older person in recovery, you're constantly learning, it's changing, it's a lifelong disease. And I see that as a plus. But then again, there are physical changes, as we talked about, limitations to our health, all of that. A big plus is that as an older adult, we get to share our wisdom. We like to refer to it as the voluntary research we did in our life, right? And we have a lot of it often. And I've said, people with lived experience and living experience. So we've lived it and we're still living it. That's the point. Sometimes we have to be careful, and it can be a negative, that we can get stagnant in our recovery. We've been doing the same thing for a while, and then sometimes we might think, I don't need that meeting anymore. I don't need this group anymore. And then we start to run into some troubled areas, or, we're at risk of maybe a relapse. So stagnancy can happen, but we have these multiple paths and so many different things you can try. And that's one of the things I love about the recovery centers, is that, when you are feeling stagnant, go there. There's just so many opportunities to give back and to learn. The panel is going to talk a lot about that. You now have these new and healthier relationships you're developing, maybe rekindled old relationships. That's a great plus when you're a senior in recovery. But on the other side of that, we've lost a lot of friends and family. We lose a lot of friends and family. First of all, as older adults, we find that to happen because we're older and we know more people, and our family members are older. And it seems like we're always saying, oh my gosh, another one, And then I think it's even compounded with the fact that we're people in recovery, and many of our friends and people that we've associated ourselves with and that we grow to love and care, often pass as a result of their use, or even overdose, which is unfortunate. So we have that. And on the big plus, we have a lot of lessons learned, right? We've learned a lot. And we certainly, most of us look back at that and say, boy, I learned a lot through that experience. It's really good to be on that side of something that might've been very painful, and then to see that we actually learned from it. But with that, we have regrets. And that's kind of what ifs are often the hardest thing to deal with as an older adult in recovery. It's not so much, like the things that, we've done or whatever, and we can get through, but it's like the what ifs that sometimes you can fall into, like, if only I had done this, or what if that. But hopefully you get to a place where you can look back and see it was all for something. Everything just worked out, and that's what was intended to happen. So as I said before, we like to say we recover out loud. Here are some people who recover out loud, right? And this is what we're learning to do. So we have Edie Falco. She was in The Sopranos, and she did Nurse Jackie. And actually that was part of her story. She was opiate addicted, and she was very involved in 12-step programs herself. Elton John, very vocal about Elton John was inspired by the whole, by Ryan White and his death, and it really changed him. And he actually, after that had happened, his first time he went into rehab, was, he had done so much activism. And when Ryan died, he just felt a lot of regret, and that he had spent that decade kind of absorbed in alcohol and cocaine use. And so he sought treatment in 1990, actually, and never went back. He's been very verbal about that. Eric Clapton, down in the bottom, he was a heroin addict, actually, for quite some time in the 70s. And he also used alcohol and cocaine. And he went into rehab in the in the late 80s. And then he started the Crossroads Center, which was an alcohol and drug treatment center out in the Caribbean, and has been in recovery ever since. And then my hero over there, who, you know, I just strive to be like, Miss Jamie Lee Curtis, because she's just so cool. And she's a vocal person in recovery from alcohol and drug addiction. And she herself states her greatest single accomplishment of her life is that she got into recovery. And she's had a lot of pretty good accomplishments. That she's a very outspoken advocate for drug misuse awareness and changes in the opiate policy. She's been very verbal about that. So if they can recover out loud and they have, you know, pretty good reputations, we can recover out loud too, right? So with that, I am going to introduce a fabulous group of people, which is our panelists. And they're going to talk further about some of these issues. So first we have Miss Julie Bunch, who is going to be the moderator, our own personal Oprah for this panel. And Julie is the Northeast Regional Coordinator for MOAR, which is the Massachusetts Organization for Addiction Recovery that we talked about earlier, and she'll fill you in a little on that as well. And then we have Jose Cruz. He's the baby of this crew here. And he is a recovery coach at one of our recovery centers in Lawrence, the New Beginnings. Jose is a great addition to our panel today. And we have Miss Deb Korch, who is a program coordinator over at No One Walks Alone in Whitensville. And that is a great recovery center out in the Central Mass. And we're so glad to have you here too, Deb. We have Mr. Kevin LeBeau, the snazzy dresser there, who is the virtual outreach coordinator at Hope for Holyoke Recovery Center in Western Mass, Holyoke. And then we have Miss Lorraine Barton, who is she's a member of Step Rocks and longtime and advocate for recovery in the Boston area, and a recovery coach over at Step Rocks Recovery Center, and does a lot of work in the Boston area. So I'm going to turn it over to Julie, who's going to get it going with the panel. Thank you all so much.
Hi, everyone. I just want to say thank you, Debbie, that was so all around, included so much stuff. It was a lot. It was really a lot. And you touched upon everything that older adults are dealing with these days. Like Debbie said, my name is Julie, and I'm a woman in long-term recovery. And what that means for me is I have not used a substance in 28 years. What I have been afforded to raise a foster family, own property, pay taxes, and being able to be a productive member of my society, which I never thought I could be. So that's a great surprise to me. I work for a Massachusetts Organization for Addiction and Recovery, and what we are is we are an advocacy agency that works a lot with state and policymakers to change laws around people who suffer from substance use disorder. We bring to attention, we educate the public, which is huge about substance use disorder. And I'm going to talk about like where I came from, since it was, 28 years ago. Some people consider that the dark ages, and what was available to me. What was available to me then was, I went into, I would say, some sort of hospital that focused on substance use disorder. And we talked all about it. They educated me about, what was going on with me, which I never knew, like what was going on with me. It was a moral issue for me. Why couldn't I stop? What was wrong with me? So, I went into that place, and I experienced that. And then they told me where to go to continue on that road to recovery, which was, for me, it was AA, NA, a 12-step based program, which was really all that was available to us then. And that program is based in an abstinence, basically like you just don't use no matter what. And they give you tools, and they gave me a toolbox that, I could pull out of my toolbox when I was feeling anxious, when I, had to live life on life's terms, because I had never done that before. My whole form was rooted in using substances. So what I was able to find in that was I was able to, some people say they reinvented themselves. I invented myself through that program. I found out who I was, what my likes were, what my dislikes were, who I wanted to be in contact with. Did I want to go to school, and so it afforded me who I am today. And what that did was let me to expand my world, which is how I became involved with MOAR, Massachusetts Organization for Addiction Recovery, which is the voice of recovery. I do a lot of work in the community with people who are recovering and who are less fortunate, and tell me, what they think is needed in the recovery world. And then I take that knowledge, I combine it with other knowledge, and I start to educate policymakers and state legislators. We create bills. I also advocate for people who are just coming into the recovery field, to let them know that they do have a voice and they are a constituent, and people are very interested in what you have to say. So that's a little bit about me, and we'll get back to me afterwards. But I just would like to talk a little bit and introduce, some of our panelists. And I'd like to start out with Deb, who is involved with the Recovery Center No One Walks Alone, and tell us a little bit about your experience.
Well, thank you, Julie. I'm so glad to be here. My name's Deb. I am a program coordinator at NOAA. Um, I'm thrilled that I'm a senior because now I can get discounted movie tickets and cheaper haircuts, which is really pleasant for me. Often we talk about our first use, and I have come to find out that my first use of altering substance was in utero. And when I got out, I got a little older and I had a bottle and there was vodka in it to keep me quiet. And we had Southern Comfort and Jack Daniels for teething. We had ginger brandy for any upset stomach. And it was just the way it was. It was a life, and everybody used it medicinally. Through a series of events, my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease when I was 3. And I was always fascinated by the brain after that. It was a horrific journey to be on as a little one. So I became a runner, I didn't cry. I was really tough. Threw away just about everything, including a fully paid college career, because I thought it would be better to get in a 68 Catalina and drive across country and open a custom designed waterbed store. That was my thought process. And as time went on, things got worse. And my first treatment center was Beach Hill Hospital up in New Hampshire. It was gorgeous. They fed us steak and all of these wonderful things. And I'd never been away at all and not have to take care of somebody else. So I loved it. And then we were all sitting on a sectional sofa and starting the first meeting. I had no idea what meetings were. I was totally clueless. And everybody went around and said, my name is John and I'm an alcoholic. And it came to me, and I was the last one sitting on the very last. I really didn't want to be there. I was on the outside of the couch. And when it came time to say what I was, I couldn't say it. And I ran to my room like a drama queen and collapsed on the bed. And it was just too much. And I didn't understand it. So I was giving an intake. And I figured if I tell them I did more, I would get better drugs. So that's what I did. But as I did it, I realized I was telling the truth. and I was very sick. And this was a 28-day program. Back in the day, it was normal. This was early 90s. But of course, I became a group leader, because I could fix everybody else but myself. I couldn't figure out why the lady in my room with me kept getting on her knees. What the heck is that about? As I left, she handed me her card. She was a sister, a cloistered nun that I got sober with, which was really quite cool. So ins and outs, a lot of things happened after I came out and tried to find a sponsor. She said no. I disintegrated. Come to find out, she was sponsoring 7 other women. Recovery is funny. It's one of those journeys that I hear people talk about, and I'm just fascinated. We have such interesting lives. The fact that we're here, I didn't think I'd make 30, never mind 60. So there must be a reason. I guess my job's not done. So I found Noah through Zoom. And Zoom and I are not best friends, as you could probably tell by my entrance today. But I looked in at this meeting, and there's a huge table, and there were people all around it. And I recognized somebody I knew from prior meetings. So I said, what's this all about? So I enjoyed that first meeting. We did some meditation. Then I think it was within that week, I went to Noah. And as soon as I walked in the door, somebody greeted me. And they were so kind and friendly, and people had food. And I hadn't seen a recovery meeting like that. It's actually a huge pool table that's covered up so that people can eat on it, but it's massive. Perfect for a kitchen of people who are trying to hang out together, learn from each other. And I've been here ever since. I absolutely love it. I've never seen any dynamics of a system like this. I'm not doing paperwork. I'm sitting there talking to you, and it's the best thing ever. I've met so many really, really cool people. We go on events and things like that. We had a wonderful family fun day this year. We've had 2 holiday potlucks since I've been here, and it's fun. We get to help people feel good, redesign their lives, and have fun. So that's how I got to Noah. So I will share the time, and I'm sure we'll talk more later.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you. That was very inspiring. I would like to, Jose, what did you, in your journey of recovery, what was out there in the beginning for you, and how did you become involved in your recovery center, which is New Beginnings in Lawrence?
Yeah, as my name's Jose. I'm a person in recovery, and I work in New Beginnings Peer Recovery Center in Lawrence, Massachusetts. What caught my attention, I was raised in the Bronx. I started using in the early 80s when the pandemic of crack came out, pandemic of AIDS. So I really didn't had it so good. I had a rough life, never had a dad. Moving right along, what got me out here, I met my wife, and we moved on to move out of the Bronx. I graduated from a TC program called Phoenix House in Yorktown. I was a role model to younger youth people. I always like to work in the field, giving back a lot, but I always had a problem. I always look back. It was something missing. I didn't understand. Me moving on and marrying my wife, we lived in Dominican Republic. It didn't went too well over there. We moved to Puerto Rico. We ended up back here in Lawrence, Massachusetts. I remember I started a job as a monitor for kids in needs, with Down syndrome. So I always like doing stuff. I always had that heart to give back, and help. So through all my life, I used to gang bang and all that. So me coming here, I had an accident in the bus of where I was working, and I went through the hospital, they gave me medications, you know, and I didn't realize that the medication was going to really make me have a downfall. And I had a real bad relapse through medication they was prescribing me. And that's why today I don't like prescribed medication for now. Right now, I'm going through a very difficult pain moment because I got I got a hernia, a disc hernia in my back, and I'm really going through a lot of pain. I don't want no pain medication, but I'm taking ibuprofen and stuff. You know, I'm 60 years old. You know, and I just became 60. That's why they were saying I'm the baby, but I don't think I'm the baby. But yeah, I just became 60. You know, and what I had the downfall. My wife had threw me out my house when I had a relapse. She didn't had no choice but to throw me out. And I always say I think that was the best thing that ever happened to me. You know, I don't look at it as it was bad. At the time she did that, let me tell you, son, I have resentments. I hated her at the time because I didn't realize that there was a purpose for me going through that moment. That if I would not go through that moment living in a bus stop in a bench 5 below zero and didn't know where to go to and where to run to, you know, I mean, I've been through so many hard times in New York and my relapses and all my years in and using and shooting drugs since I started in the age of 15 years old, you know. But coming here, I think that was the best moment because then she tried to help me out while I was on the bus stop and I was homeless because she threw me out, but she always used to check on me. You know, she always, because I lived across the street from the bus stop in Lawrence, Massachusetts. So I had a little bench there with some sheets in a bag, and nighttime I'd crawl and it'd be 12:30 at night and I'd be frozen to death. And for me, that was a great experience because then I didn't want to listen to her. I didn't want to listen to nobody. You know, that's why I always tell people when you're ready to make up your mind to seek help, I mean you where you at, and I'm here for you. Because a lot of times I went through that. I had to do it on my own. I went and I got help on my own. I said, I can't do this. I threw those sheets in a bag in the morning and I went to a shelter, a walk-in center that's called House of Mercy in Lawrence, Massachusetts, where they could homeless people could shower, they could eat. You know, they give them a meal. They also preach you the scriptures and all that other stuff. So I went there. From there on, I met the pastor there called Rogers. He said, send me to a program. But the thing about it, that's where I met Socrates and Joanna, which became my bosses, which at first they became a help to me because when I was going through my problems, you know, and these are people, they not in recovery, but they had a lot to give me. You know, they used to talk to me and the words sometimes they used to touch me, it used to really touch me. And I stood clean, you know, for 4 years going there, being a role model to others and giving back what was given to me. They put me as part of their staff, you know, and I've been staff 3 years there now. And I wasn't also a member there as a peer leader there. I also became staff, you know, because they saw I kept it real, you know. I came every day, I gave back, I cleaned, you know, because recovery is just not being clean. Recovery is about working in your defective characters. Like I had anger issues. I did anger management there. You know, I did so much, you know, to help myself first. Because how can I say I'm gonna go back to my family? How am I help them if I can't help myself first? So, you know, I went in there real broken, didn't know where to go. But these are the best 8 years, man, that I have in recovery, whether I've been through process and I'm go through my stuff and all that. I know that I never run to seek that void where I don't have to today. I got my support system. I got my toolbox that if I'm going through something and I feel anger and I wake up in a bad mood and I have a drunk dream or whatever, because it still happens. It don't matter how long you got clean, it could happen. I always learned that today. So I got that toolbox where I know I could go in there, take out the tools, which I didn't use before. They used to get rusty, but today I know I got a toolbox that I could count on. And I know a lot of y'all could identify with me that's been there. You know, I go there and I say, I grab that phone, yo, I'm going through this. Who I'm gonna call? Who I'm gonna do this? I know I'm not going to Flaco or Indio today. No way, I don't want that because the choices we make is gonna be bad choices or good choices. You got two ways to go. Make a bad choice or good choice. The bad choice is gonna keep moving on a day at a time. But that's how I got here, with the support system I had going through the doors there. And they, the thing about it that, back then we didn't have none of this stuff. And like a lot of y'all, I heard y'all talking and I said, man, I remember back in the 80s, they didn't have none of that. They had a methadone clinic that they send you to, and the methadone wasn't no good because it tear up your bones. And, you had, and it was smoking bomb. You go and then it was like, but and going in there, seeing food tables, seeing games, seeing TV, seeing people cook and having a nice hot meal and giving you a hug and accepting you and not judging you for what you are and what you did, so that's where, I'm gonna share the time. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you so much, Jose. And I have the privilege of spending time with you every week. And I would like to say how much of a role model you are in the Peer Recovery Support Center and how you empower individuals up there and help them to be able to navigate their recovery. I would like to next introduce Lorraine, who has been on the landscape and seen a lot of changes about, substance use, the recovery field. And I'd like for her to share a little bit about those changes and how she became involved in one of the oldest peer support centers in Boston.
Thank you, Julie, and it's still good morning. Good morning for 2 more minutes to everyone. And to all the participants on, thank you for coming and sharing your day with us here and, talking a little bit, because, this is just going to be a little bit about aging and recovery, because it's a big, big story to tell. So, yes, my name is Lorraine Barton, and I am a woman in long-term recovery. I have been in and around recovery for approximately 35 years now. When Jose was talking about the 80s and the crack, I went right back there because I remember that, in the AIDS and all of that. My journey began because people I knew and loved and grew up with were becoming HIV positive. And that's where, well, we'll talk about the advocacy later. Okay, so my journey began around 35 years ago. I went to treatment at what was then known as Doctors Hospital. It is now AdCare Hospital in Worcester. So that tells you how long ago that was. And those who know George Kenney had come to do a commitment at Doctors Hospital. And he started talking about 12-step programs. And of course, I heard about AA. So I was half listening, but when I got home, I threw my bags I lived in a basement apartment. I call it my den of iniquity. I threw them bags down those stairs and went to my first Narcotics Anonymous meeting. And, I'm so glad for that day. They say, do 30, 60, 90, what have you. And I doubled that. You can believe that. I went to meetings every day, 2-3 times a week. I did 60, 120, and 180 because I was hungry after that first meeting. I didn't know. I didn't have a context for the word recovery. I had never heard it, didn't know it was possible. Again, I knew about AA, and for me, that was where people went and tried. Also, let me just quickly say this. When I was in Doctor's Hospital, you talking about your family history, and they kept trying to say that my parents, were alcoholics. Like, my parents are no alcoholics. What are you talking about? They drink, but to me, an alcoholic back then was a drunk on the corner. Both of my parents were functional. One worked for the city, one worked for the state. You couldn't tell me that they were addicted to anything, yet they were. They absolutely were. So, after a few relapses, I found myself This is after years of using. I got rated and my health started to change. I'm saying this, it's convoluted because my health was changing for years. I actually was a director of a neighborhood center for 12 years in my life. And when Deborah Koch was talking about her father getting Alzheimer's when she was a child, my father got Alzheimer's when I was a young woman. I was raising 4 children. I'm raising 4 children, director of a neighborhood center, taking care of my father, and had a heroin habit taller than the Prudential building. And it was truly running and coping as fast as I can. It was a lot. It was a lot. And the question is, what brought me to the center? So my cousin, I was very sick. I stayed in the bed for 2 years, only going to doctor's appointments. Due to my use and abuse of drugs, I got vascular disease, which gave me very bad wounds on my feet, on my legs. So she kept saying, you got to get up, you got to come. So I went to Step Rocks with her to a morning meeting. And I went the next day. Then I went the next day. Then I found myself at the front desk volunteering. Then I found myself managing the front desk. So the story, and I've been there this year going on 10 years. I never left. I found camaraderie there, the fellowship in and out of the center. It rebuilt my faith in recovery. I didn't run headfirst back into Narcotics Anonymous because it's like any other population of people. It has its issues. But I found my base right there in the center. And I was grateful to get up every morning. Even though I was on a walker, I was grateful to get up and go to Step Rocks every morning. I found my place. And I was at a place in my life where I didn't know where my place was. The children were gone. The grandchildren were growing up. And, we'll talk about this later as well, but the isolation and loneliness was real, and I was aging, and all those things that Deborah Gonzalez talked about earlier, those things that happen to our bodies, some associated with the use and abuse of drugs, but also just the aging process hit me like a Mack truck. And, neuropathy and just everything. He was talking about his back. Oh, I could just tell you. So I understood. And then the pain, and it's a sin in the world that I came in recovery. It's a sin. Don't think about taking a pain pill, so that struggle was real for me. But I found a place of comfort and, as I said, camaraderie and fellowship at Step Rocks. So was that all of the question? Did I answer the whole question?
Most certainly did, Lorraine, and you always answer all of the question. So you don't have to, you answer all of the question.
Okay, thank you.
I would next like to introduce Kevin, who I've not had the pleasure to meet, but if you could briefly share a little bit about your experience in the Recovery Center, and just keep in mind that we do want to have some time for questions and answers.
Sure, thank you. It's an honor and privilege to be here. My name is Kevin LeBeau. I'm a person and a young man in long-term recovery. And I'm thankful for the panel. Thank you for everyone for being here and the participants today. I got sober on a day like any other day, walking around, collecting cans, trying to make some sort of a ching so I can get the bottle to get me to the next step. And that was depression and despair and anger. And what happened was I made a phone call instead. I called the only man I knew that was sober at that time. It was my father. And I asked him for help. And don't ask me where that came from. I can't tell you. Back then I wouldn't be able to, but today I know it came through a divine intervention, through a power greater than myself. I'm not that smart. I'm not that powerful. I cannot get anyone sober and I can't get anyone drunk. And that man agreed to pick me up and bring me to a rehabilitation center, which I spent the next 28 days in. After I got out, I was scared like a kid getting on a school bus for kindergarten. I am a proud member of AARP. I do have a card. And today, and I think today, you know, through the years from that day where I got that ride to my first AA meeting right on Chestnut Street, around the corner from Hope for Holyoke on Suffolk Street, there was some really hard times. There were times of despair, times that I felt like I let the world down. I put everything on my shoulders. But I knew one thing, that I didn't want to drink for that day. And for one day at a time, I was told that I could do that. If I tried to look into the future, there would be a problem. And sooner or later, my desire to stay sober would be overtaken my desire to drink. And if it sounds like a 12-step book, that's where I was brought up in AA, where I got sober on a beautiful day on March 28th of 1992. And I've met a lot of people along the way. I was 25 years sober when I was working for an intergroup office, which is a central service office for Alcoholics Anonymous. I had my father back in my life, my dad, who I used to swear at, put down. I don't want to be like you. I don't have a problem. Stayed by my side and held my hand like a child for many, many years. I met a sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous who told me that, you know, I do have a chance, that recovery is possible. That thousands of men and women have recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. It doesn't say how. It says if you follow a few steps. It doesn't tell me that I won't relapse. It doesn't tell me that I'm not going to have family troubles. Inside the book that I read, along with the book that was introduced to me later on by Debbie and Dennis and Celebrate Recovery, I began to see where I belonged in life. It's like Harry Chapin's Cat's a Cradle. You know, I want everything back now. I want my children to, but you know what? They're turning up just like me. In some incidences, I want you back, and I can't get that right away. There's not proving myself. Of course, I have to make amends and do things in my life that will help me find that person inside me that I truly know that God intends me to be. So how my journey gets to a certain point is that I'm at this intergroup office now for 25 years, and I'm enjoying my job, and I'm working for Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was in radio and television before that, and I truly enjoyed that. But drinking took that away. And then what happened was, one day there's a gentleman standing on the corner. I'll never forget him because he changed my life. And my sponsee, Marcos, who is a member of this place called Hope for Holyoke. I didn't know what it was. And I'm less than 3 minutes away from there, my central office for AA, and I never even knew this place existed. So Marcos says to me, Kevin, why don't we ask the guy if he wants to go to Hope for Holyoke and get some help? And I said, where's that? It's a peer recovery center. I said, what's that? Sometimes we grow into certain programs or positions with these blinders on, like the horses wear, and we don't know anything else because we don't take the time to open up. We talk about open-mindedness in all fellowships, and for me, it was, I did not accept anything else except that AA structure. And so what happened was, and I'll keep it short as possible, is that the gentleman came in and we gave him some water, and Marcos got him some clothes out of the church bin, and he got dressed, and we took him to this place called Hope for Holyoke. And as Debbie would tell you, I walked in and I say, I got 12 step by God. The hairs on my arms went up. I got emotional. And I watched these people that I never knew existed go into a manner that in less than 20 minutes got him a coffee, asked him how he was doing. I was shaking, asked me how I was doing. And they showed love and compassion for this person. And in 20 minutes, one guy's on the phone getting him into a treatment facility center. And next thing you know, he's on his way to Worcester to detox. He got out of detox and he came to Hope for Holyoke for the groups. And then he met a wonderful person in his life, and I hope he's still doing well. But as we grow, we go sometimes. And but the thought and that young man put and that center put into me did not go away. I couldn't leave. I wanted to be part of it now. And here I am, 65 years old now, and I've been with going on 8 years with Hope for Holyoke, 6 as an employee. Debbie offered me a job. I went, oh no. And I kind of moved my way in but I did it as a member, a volunteer, a peer leader, and then a staff member. I had to learn things and let go of certain things that I held so onto so long, was that I had to learn that there's other ways to find recovery than just the way that I learned. So taking those blinders off, meeting people, you know, I was kind of like one of the oldest ones in the room. So I gravitated to Dennis, Debbie's husband. We sat in this room and we talked about recovery. And then over time, I was able to then, people would ask me to share my story. I was able to share my testimony at a Celebrate Recovery meeting. I was able to talk about things that I thought I'd never talk about again in my life. I have a beautiful wife that I met in Alcoholics Anonymous. We'll be married 20 years in September. Um, and my baby sister, Sherry. We are a family. We say sometimes we're not, but we are. When the door closes at the end of the day, we pray for each other. We pray for people to find the solution. I got it, and I'm blessed because God's given me that grace that I hope everyone sees.
And,
I learned that.
Kevin, thank you for all of
Okay.
that. I want to, kind of get another question out there before I want to
Sure.
open it up
All right.
for my question is, as an older adult, what do you think that you can bring to the younger people in the recovery center? For me, I explained to them that this is a very exciting time because there are so many avenues for recovery that we didn't get to experience, So I'm going to pose that question to you, Lorraine.
So right off the rip, that's it right there. This is a different time. We are growing. They are coming in at a very different time. First and foremost, I know that I contribute my experience, strength, and hope. Absolutely. I have a lot of experience in active addiction and a lot of experience in recovery. And my hope never wavers. I have walked many paths and crossed several streams and maneuvered many highways and byways. My recovery helped me become a responsible member of society. In recovery, I joined school parent councils and neighborhood associations. The AIDS epidemic hit hard, and my advocacy skills began to bloom right then. The importance of education became paramount in my life. And I pushed the agenda at every opportunity that I could. But the language has changed so much. And that for me, and not it is an important part of what I need to say. It's often difficult for me to remember some things, okay? Aging and recovery. And the alphabet, I have to say that's what it is. The alphabet is the LGBTQIA. Did I get it right? Hot dog. Because I often don't. I often don't. It's a lot for me. And you should have, in my head this morning, I keep repeating it and repeating it so I wouldn't mess it up here. Because those are the things I have to do, repetition, repetition, in order to remember things. And not only remembering the lineup, but maintaining a clear understanding of what each alphabet means. Because young folks got it down. You know, when they're talking to you, and they know it. I have to pause and be intent about who and what I'm saying. In this work, understanding who you are talking to is vitally important. But language stretches further in recovery and in society as a whole, right? You know, implicit bias, equity, intersectionality, microaggression, our entire recovery and world, language is changing, right? So wisdom, you know, I try to impart my wisdom, and I try to listen as they impart theirs, because I am able to learn today. I'm teachable. That's it.
Thank you, Lorraine. And you know what? I'm so sorry that I'm not going to be able to pose more questions to everyone else, because this can go on and on. And I would like to say, you know, what we learned from the younger adults, for me, you know, as Debbie mentioned, that we can get complacent in our recovery. And, you know, I found that out of the recovery centers, and I learned from the younger people, is I can get fired up about recovery, you know, today. You know, they get me excited, you know, with their new, you know, their new, this new pathway, harm reduction, you know, also technology. You know, I gotta get a youngin to help me, you know, with the technology. So I would like to open it up for questions from the audience. And do we have any?
Yes, we do. I can read one if you'd like. One question is, are there any resources, curriculum frameworks that you can recommend for a social worker interested in starting an older adult recovery support group?
Who would like to take that?
I don't know of any curriculum, and that's very interesting. There should be one. But Deborah, you mentioned a book earlier. I don't know if that has anything to do about aging, but what I could say, if you want to start something, start talking to people who have experience. Start, you know, meeting with them. Go have some coffee with them. We are a bevy of education and comments and wisdom. So try that.
And I think this is why we're having this webinar, to, you know, expand on more resources for older adults, because what we're noticing as the baby boomers come into this realm, there is not a lot for us older adults.
Exactly right. I was going to say that there are curriculums for pregnant and parenting moms, or a curriculum for young people in recovery, and there really isn't one in existence. However, within the peer network, you know, this is what emerges from many of the centers, and with peers who are older adults in recovery that start their own support groups and different activities. They're starting to emerge, and that might be a great goal for people to have, you know, for a group of us to even start thinking about that. I will add that there is the peer support toolkit that I provide to a lot of spaces and people, and particularly social work students and social workers can refer to that, which gives a lot of good groundwork and information on, like, just how to start a peer support group. So peers can, you know, start running and facilitating a support group, you know, really focused on any group. And then there's some good information with that, so I can make sure that that information gets out.
Okay, and I see a couple of people have their hand raised. Is it okay if I call on people to, okay, Blake? You can unmute yourself.
I think Blake is saying his speaker doesn't work.
Okay.
If he can just
Oh.
put it in the
Yeah,
chat.
put it in the chat and I'll move on to Laura while we're waiting. Laura Crosby.
Hi, I first want to thank you all for, for doing this panel discussion. And my name is Laura Crosby. I am Workforce Development Coordinator at the Bureau of Substance Addiction Services. And to speak to the last question about curriculum to support a group, the Bureau of Substance Addiction Services is currently revising a practice guidance. And so, at this very moment this week, we're working on revising a practice guidance to ensure that treatment for older adults is adapted to their unique needs. And this includes stigma and just a variety of different things. So that's something that we're hoping to have available for anyone that's interested in using sometime before the end of this year.
Thanks so much, Laura. I also put the link to the Careers of Substance website in the chat, which also has training and events as well, as you know. I see that we have a couple great questions from Mark, who asks a couple questions. One, how do you keep your recovery fresh after so many years? And then also, what's been the biggest gift of long-term recovery you didn't expect?
I can say for me, I'm just going to answer what is getting old. I never thought that I would be able to get old. Okay, so I just had to throw that in there. Anybody else who would like to unmute yourself and just answer the rest of the question, or
Kevin wants to answer. Go ahead, Kevin. I have a quick thing
No,
to
I
say as
just
well.
wanted to say that life in general today is probably the greatest gift I've gotten. The biggest gift in recovery was the fact that I got hit by a heart condition that brought me to a heart transplant in 2015. And if I wasn't in recovery and sober and not using anything, I would have never have gotten a heart
Right.
transplant. So God was looking out for me a long time beforehand. And today the greatest gift is that we'll be down with the family again in Ohio in August, and we spend a couple of weeks down there. And I have my donor's son is like my own kid now.
That's wonderful.
And he reminds me every day. He just turned 11 2 days ago, and I'm going to be 10. And he reminds me he's older than me.
Fantastic.
And that's the love that you find not only inside recovery rooms, but what spills over to the outside. Thank you.
Real quickly, the biggest gift is life itself, but I just became a great grandmother, something I thought I would never see. My mother passed away at 55. I am almost 66, and I became a great grandmother. What a gift.
I just want to answer the first part of that question is how do you keep your recovery fresh? For me, like I said, I work for an advocacy agency. There's coalitions, there's task force. People want to be educated about recovery. And who knows more about recovery and substance use disorder than we do? I was told that once because I was feeling inadequate. And someone told me, who knows more about it than you do? And I was like, oh, okay. So that's what keeps my recovery fresh.
Absolutely, Julie. And seeing people come in and get it. When you see the light go on behind those eyes, when they get it and they're grabbing on to recovery, that's what keeps my recovery fresh. Come on now.
So I think, Cassie, we got time for one more quick one.
We have a question about access to support and a lengthy criminal record. So I believe recovery centers, anyone can access recovery centers, correct? I mean, in terms of advocacy for a criminal record, I will put in some links for legal services, as well as mass legal help. And I don't know, Laura or Deborah, if you have any other guidance around access to other services and quarries, yeah, feel free to chime in.
Yes, and definitely the recovery support centers are very well accustomed to working with folks that are just coming out of incarceration or with CORI issues. And many of them, work right directly with them, have people coming in or have really good connections with people in the community that can help with those type things. So, it's again why we it's looking at the recovery centers as the place to go for all of those things. It's really the hub in the community for where you can access and find these services or call them up. Also the helpline, which is on the resource list there, the mass helpline you can access and talk to a live person to say, I need help with this. And they can, get you help with something specific. But really accessing those, the recovery support centers, because they're gonna really give you the information you need and be able to walk you through it.
And the Office of Returning Citizens. Office of Returning Citizens is a great help.
Many of the communities have after incarceration services too, and centers that you can go to. It's just across the state, it's different depending on the community you're in. So referring to the helpline or to the local recovery center, even if you called them, they would know exactly where you can go for some of those specific services.
Great. And Blake, do you want to try again one more time? See, you raised your hand again.
Poor Blake.
Okay.
Could I just pose one more question to the group, and maybe just as a final thought, what would you all say? And thank you so much to this amazing panel. I just love you all so much. And thank you to you as well, Julie, for moderating this session. But you've heard about, the difference that it's made in the lives of the panelists and so many others that you haven't heard when they did get involved with their peer recovery support center. So there might be people out there that are thinking, I don't know if that's for me, or I don't know if I could do that, or, what would you say to someone who is in recovery or seeking recovery, or someone dealing with a substance use disorder, or a family member? Because any of those people are eligible to go into a recovery center. There's no questions asked, and you don't need insurance. You're just going to be welcomed in love, like most of the people here said. As soon as I walked in, I felt at home, and that's what it is. So what would you guys have anything maybe you could say, any words of advice or something you'd like to say to someone who might be contemplating that, thinking about it? What would you say to get them there? What would be the benefit to go in there, and what would you have to say to them? Final words.
Go ahead, Debbie.
Hi. I would just invite the person in so that they can see for themselves and feel the energy of what's going on. We've had people come here for yoga. In my journey, I started teaching yoga and Reiki and a lot of holistic stuff. And that often gets people intrigued, all these new paths that we have, all these ways to spend your day, because sometimes a day is just too long, and typically when they come in, there's food on the stove and there's members that are just enveloping them. It's like a feeling I've never seen before, and it's uniform at the center. Everybody wants to be here. Nobody's trudging the road to happy destiny. We're actually enjoying life, and that's palatable. It's so crucial for someone to feel welcome and wanted and respected. And I really think that's what these peer centers do so well.
Thank you, Deborah. And I think that's all we have time for. I just want to make sure that we thank all the panelists. This was a wonderful opportunity. We might have to do a second part for this. So if you guys are interested in that, please reach out, let us know. This is great, the participants, thank you. I hope you got something out of this. And I would like to, again, thank you again and have a great afternoon.